You're tuned in to Beyond the Known. The night was quiet over eastern England in August of 1956 until the radar screens came alive. Blips appeared where no aircraft should be, racing across the sky faster than anything built by man. At the Lakenheath Air Base, controllers watched in disbelief as one object broke formation and began circling a pursuing jet, matching its every turn. Moments later, the craft vanished straight off radar, leaving only static and silence behind. The report was stamped, filed, and buried deep within Project Blue Book.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Known. Today, we are cracking open one of the most talked about, maybe one of the most complicated archives in modern military history.
We're looking at the files of the U.S. Air Force's official investigation into unidentified flying objects. The big one, Project Blue Book.
Right. This program ran for, over 2 decades? Started really with that post-war flying saucer craze around 1947, and it didn't officially close until 1969.
And for years, the final word from Blue Book was basically the official American line on UFOs. Nothing really there. Move along.
But that's what we want to dig into today, isn't it? We want to challenge that official stance a bit.
Exactly. We need to peel back the layers, look at the institutional pressures, the original security goals, and then get into the really compelling stuff.
You mean the encounters they couldn't explain away? The ones that just defied conventional answers?
Those are the ones. And crucially, we need to trace the journey of the project's own lead scientific consultant, Dr. Jallenhynek.
Ah, yes, Hynek. He started as the government's go-to skeptic, didn't he?
He did. But he ended up becoming a major voice, calling for serious scientific study of these things. It's quite a transformation.
Okay, so that's the core conflict we're exploring. We'll start by looking at how Blue Book got started, its goals, and maybe why it quickly became more about PR than pure science.
Then we'll dedicate some real time to the extraordinary encounters themselves, cases with physical evidence, radar tracks, the hard stuff.
And after that, we compare the official explanations. Venus, swamp gas, all the usual suspects against the actual evidence from these really strong cases.
Finally, we'll look at how it all wrapped up, the project's legacy, which is, pretty complex and definitely controversial.
Okay, we just opened a sealed file. Let's start by defining what Project Blue Book actually was and why it wasn't just a straightforward scientific investigation.
Well, when we talk about Blue Book, it's important to remember it wasn't the very first attempt. Officially, it kicked off in March 1952.
But it came after earlier programs, right? I think Project Sign and Project Reg.
That's right. Blue Book inherited the files and arguably some of the internal conflicts from those earlier efforts. And the scale of it was just enormous.
People often forget that part. How many cases did they look into by the end?
The final tally was 12,618 reported sightings investigated between 1947 and 1969. A huge volume of data.
So what were the official goals? What was the Air Force supposed to be doing?
On paper, it was a 3-part mandate. And the order kind of matters. First, figure out if UFOs were a threat to national security. That was paramount.
Okay, makes sense, especially during the Cold War.
Absolutely. Second was supposed to be scientific analysis of the data collected. But the third goal, public reassurance, arguably became the most important one over time.
So managing public perception, keeping people calm.
Pretty much. The Cold War context is key here. The Air Force was under immense pressure to control the narrative, prevent panic, and avoid confusion with potential Soviet technology.
And the research we looked at shows that right at the beginning, after that 1947 Kenneth Arnold sighting really kicked things off, the military was genuinely split on this, weren't they?
Oh, deeply divided. During Project Sign, the first phase, you had 2 main camps forming within intelligence circles.
What were they thinking?
Well, one group, looking at the reports coming in from pilots and radar operators, credible sources felt this needed to be taken very seriously.
Seriously, how? Like, maybe not ours.
Exactly. This led to a top-secret document in 1948 called the Estimate of the Situation. It actually suggested the objects were likely interplanetary.
Interplanetary. They put that in writing.
They did. Manned craft of interplanetary origin was the phrase used in some drafts, apparently.
Yeah.
And it recommended the military consider moving to an alert status.
Wow. So the initial high-level thinking leaned towards extraterrestrial.
It seems that way, yes. There's also that famous letter from General Twining around the same time, basically saying these flying saucers were real objects exhibiting incredible performance, a real readiness to accept something extraordinary was happening.
But that didn't last long, did it?
No, that window of open-mindedness slammed shut pretty quickly. Project Sign became Project Grudge, and the focus shifted dramatically towards debunking, aggressive debunking.
And this bias really solidified with something called the Robertson Panel in 1953.
Yes, that was a pivotal moment. It was a CIA-backed group convened after that big wave of sightings over Washington, D.C. in '52 really spooked people.
And their conclusion wasn't exactly scientific, was it?
Not in the slightest. It was pure policy. A public relations strategy disguised as a national security measure.
What did they actually recommend?
They recommended the UFO report should be systematically debunked, stripped of their aura of mystery. The goal was to reduce public interest and prevent misidentification of conventional aircraft, especially potential Soviet ones.
And wasn't there that really strange suggestion about using, like, Walt Disney?
Yes, they literally suggested enlisting figures like Walt Disney or educational cartoon producers to help ridicule the subject, to make it seem unserious. It was about managing the narrative, not finding the truth.
And this is the environment where Dr. Hynek comes in, the astrophysicist who was, initially at least, on board with the official skepticism.
Right. He was the project's scientific consultant. He was actually present at the Robertson panel meetings.
What did he think of it?
He later said he felt even then that the subject was getting short shrift scientifically. He knew the science was taking a backseat to policy. He even privately decided he wouldn't sign their final report.
So the methodology was kind of flawed from the start, designed to dismiss.
You could say that. Hynek later described the operating principle as basically, it can't be real, therefore it isn't. This attitude shaped everything.
How did that affect the actual investigation?
Well, the reporting policies often discouraged local agencies or military bases from sending in reports unless they were easily explainable. They wanted the safe reports. Filter the data at the source.
And yet, behind the scenes, they were still interested, weren't they?
Oh, definitely. There's evidence the Air Force sometimes investigated sightings using, as the research puts it, cloak and dagger proportions. They'd inquire about incidents in ways designed not to reveal official Air Force interest.
So, publicly dismissive but privately concerned. That sounds contradictory.
It's the core tension of the whole project. It created this environment where genuine scientific inquiry was constantly stifled.
And Hynek saw this affecting the wider scientific community, too.
Yes, he called it the committee complex. He found scientists might admit privately they were intrigued by UFOs, maybe even concerned.
But they wouldn't say so publicly.
Exactly. In a committee setting or anywhere their reputation or funding was on the line, they'd clam up. Peer pressure and professional risk kept serious scientists away.
So the Air Force was running this huge investigation, but was almost pre-programmed to dismiss anything truly strange it found.
That's a fair summary. Security and public relations trumped open scientific inquiry.
Okay, we've established the purpose, the scope, the inherent conflicts within Project Blue Book. Now let's open those files. Let's look at the encounters that just wouldn't fit the mold.
Right, because if the system was designed to debunk, what happened when it encountered cases that were just too weird, too well documented?
Like the Mantell incident, that was very early on, 1948, and tragically, it involved a pilot's death.
The Mantell case is foundational. Captain Thomas Mantell was a decorated Kentucky Air National Guard pilot flying a P-51. He was scrambled with other pilots to intercept this large, metallic object seen over Kentucky.
And he pursued it aggressively.
Extremely. He reported it as metallic and tremendous in size. He chased it upwards, climbing far higher than was safe without proper oxygen equipment in his P-51.
Which led to the crash. What was the official explanation for the object he was chasing?
Initially, they said it was the planet Venus. Then they shifted to blaming a skyhook balloon, one of those large, high-altitude research balloons.
Did those explanations hold up?
Not really, according to many who reviewed the reports. The object's reported behavior just didn't fit. Witnesses on the ground saw it making fast, complex maneuvers.
Not something a balloon or a planet does.
Absolutely not. And Mantell's last transmission described the object accelerating and climbing rapidly away from him. A P-51 simply couldn't keep up with that kind of performance. It suggested intelligent control way beyond 1948 tech.
So the official story felt forced, even then.
It seemed inconsistent with the core details of the sighting, yes.
Okay, let's jump forward to 1952, a huge year for sightings, apparently, culminating in that major flap over Washington, D.C.
The summer of '52 was intense, and the Washington National incident in July, that wasn't just a few lights, it was a major event, right over the Capitol, near sensitive airports.
This is the one that really got the military's attention, wasn't it? Led to that Robertson panel we mentioned.
Directly. Yeah, because the key here was multi-sensor data. You had radar operators at Washington National Airport, Andrews Air Force Base, and another military radar site, all tracking multiple unidentified targets simultaneously.
And what were these targets doing on radar?
Moving at incredible speeds, making sharp angular turns, things that conventional aircraft or weather phenomena just don't do, completely inconsistent with radar reflections from weather, known as anomalous propagation, or AP.
Weren't jets scrambled?
Yes, F-94 interceptors were sent up, and the reports say the radar targets would often vanish as the jets got close, only to reappear nearby after the jets moved away.
That sounds like evasion, intelligent reaction.
That was the implication, certainly. It was deeply unsettling. The Air Force held its biggest press conference since World War II to try and calm things down.
And that's where they pushed the temperature inversion explanation, anomalous propagation.
Yes, General Sanford was trotted out to explain it all away as radar quirks caused by weather. Warm air trapping radar signals, making ground objects appear airborne.
But does AP really explain what happened?
AP is a real phenomenon, but it struggles to explain the DC case. For one, you had visual sightings by pilots and ground observers that matched the radar track's bright, fast-moving lights. AP doesn't typically create distinct visual objects.
And the performance, the speeds and maneuvers.
AP returns are usually diffuse, slow-moving, maybe drifting with wind layers. These radar targets were sharp, distinct, and tracked at speeds far exceeding known aircraft of the era, making sudden stops and turns. The AP explanation just didn't fit the high-quality data.
Let's move ahead a few years. 1956, the Lakenheath Bentwaters case in the UK. The research calls this one the most puzzling and unusual radar visual case, involved military personnel again.
Multiple trained observers, yes. It's classic. Started with control tower guys seeing a bright, glowing object. Then ground radar tracked an unknown target moving west at speeds estimated between 2,000 and 4,000 miles per hour.
3,000 to 4,000 in 1956. That's incredible.
Unheard of, yes. Then a C-47 transport pilot flying nearby reported a bright light streaking under his aircraft at terrific speed.
So multiple visual and radar confirmations. Then they sent up a fighter jet.
A British Venom night fighter was scrambled. The pilot acquired the target on his radar, got a gun lock. He reported it was the clearest target he'd ever seen on radar.
And what did the object do?
This is a crucial part. It reacted. As the pilot achieved radar lock, the object executed this incredibly fast circling maneuver, completely reversed direction, and ended up positioned behind the Venom jet.
It outmaneuvered a fighter jet, intelligently.
That's exactly what the report implies. Calculated, responsive behavior. The pilot was apparently astonished, trying to shake it. He estimated its rate of climb at something like 5 miles per second.
The G-forces involved in those maneuvers?
Would be astronomical, far beyond what any known aircraft or human pilot could withstand. Lakenheath points strongly towards technology operating outside our known physics, or at least our known aerospace engineering in 1956.
Okay, let's shift from radar cases to something with physical traces. The Socorro, New Mexico landing in 1964. This one had a very credible witness, right?
Extremely credible. Police officer Lonnie Zamora. Known as reliable, level-headed, and this wasn't a distant light. He saw something land, or very close to the ground.
What did he report seeing?
He was investigating what he thought might be a dynamite shack explosion, saw flame, and heard a roar. He drove closer and saw this object. Oval-shaped, metallic or silvery white, maybe 70 feet long, resting on legs or struts in an arroyo.
An actual craft on the ground. Did he see anything else?
He also reported seeing 2 small figures near the object, dressed in white coveralls. They seemed startled by his arrival and quickly re-entered the craft.
And then it took off.
Yes. As Zamora got closer, it lifted off vertically with an incredibly loud roar that rose in pitch, then went silent. It climbed extremely rapidly and disappeared.
Was there anything else? Any interaction?
Yes, and this is significant. Zamora reported his police car's engine died, or sputtered, as he approached the object. But right after the object departed, the engine started up again perfectly fine.
Electromagnetic effects, like we hear in another report.
That's the classic interpretation, yes. But the real kicker at Socorro was the physical evidence left behind.
What did they find?
Investigators, including Major Quintanilla, the head of Blue Book at the time, arrived quickly. They found 4 distinct V-shaped or wedge-shaped landing gear impressions pressed into the sandy soil, arranged in a quadrilateral pattern.
So marks where something heavy rested.
Exactly. And nearby, several greasewood bushes were found charred and burned, consistent with intense heat from below. These samples were collected and analyzed.
So you have a credible witness, electromagnetic effects, landing traces, and burn marks. What did Blue Book make of it?
This case, officially listed as unidentified, really troubled them. The research suggests even Quintanilla was privately convinced something physical had landed there. They tried to suggest maybe an experimental lunar lander test vehicle.
But was there such a vehicle?
No known project matched, and none were reported missing or tested in that area. The Socorro case remains one of the strongest pieces of evidence for a genuine unknown craft leaving physical traces. It's a prime example of what Hynek would later call a close encounter of the second kind.
These cases, Mantell, Washington, D.C., Lakenheath, Socorro, they seem to share key features, don't they? High credibility witnesses, often military, radar confirmation, intelligent or impossible maneuvers, physical effects.
Precisely. These aren't just fuzzy lights in the distance. These are the high-quality reports, the core anomalies that directly challenge Project Blue Book's mandate to find conventional explanations. This is the residue that refused to be swept away.
We've heard the reports, looked at some pretty compelling evidence. Now let's step back and really scrutinize the official explanations Blue Book offered for these kinds of sightings. How did they try to ground these extraordinary accounts?
Well, the Blue Book playbook of explanations was fairly standard and consistently applied. Astronomical objects were always popular: Venus, Jupiter, bright stars, often cited even when the object was moving rapidly or seen during the day.
Okay, stars and planets. What else?
Meteorological phenomena were huge. Temperature inversions causing radar ghosts, or anomalous propagation like we discussed with the DC case. Also mirages, ice crystals, ball lightning, although often invoked without specific weather data to back it up.
And misidentification, mistaking normal things for UFOs.
That was a big one. Conventional aircraft, weather balloons, advertising planes, even birds. There's a notorious example involving plastic dry cleaner bags being mistaken for UFOs, which became a sort of go-to explanation for the lot.
Cleaner bags, seriously.
Seriously. And finally, they'd often fall back on human perception errors. Autokinesis was a favorite.
Remind us what autokinesis is again.
It's that effect where if you stare at a single point of light in total darkness for long enough, your involuntary eye movements can make the light appear to wander or move slightly. It's a real perceptual trick.
But Blue Book applied it broadly.
Critics say yes, far too broadly, attributing complex high-speed maneuvers reported by multiple trained observers to simple autokinesis seemed, well, dismissive of the actual testimony.
And there was that methodological issue you mentioned earlier, latching onto one mundane detail.
Right. A common critique was that if a witness trying to describe something unfamiliar said, "It looked a bit like a balloon, but it moved like," the report might get classified simply as balloon, ignoring the "but it moved like" part entirely. The explanation often seemed chosen before the investigation was complete.
So let's apply this to the cases. Mantell explained as Venus or a skyhook balloon. Why doesn't that work?
Because Mantell and other witnesses described an object making definite high-speed maneuvers and climbing rapidly. A balloon drifts. Venus holds a relatively fixed position in the sky over short observation periods. The reported dynamics just don't match the explanation.
Washington, D.C., temperature inversions. The problem there.
Multiple issues. The visual confirmations by pilots and ground crews matching the radar, the reported speeds and sharp turns being inconsistent with typical EP radar returns, and the apparent evasive action when interceptors approached. Inversions don't react to fighter jets.
What about Lakenheath Bentwaters? How could they explain a radar-confirmed object outmaneuvering a jet fighter?
That one was incredibly difficult for them. Official explanations often involved attempts to break down the incident into separate, unrelated events, maybe misidentified radar signals, plus a misidentified aircraft, plus a meteor. But that requires ignoring the coherence of the event, the multiple sensors tracking the same target, and the pilot's direct engagement. It stretches credulity.
And Socorro, with the landing traces, how did they try to explain that away officially, given it remained unidentified?
They couldn't really offer a definitive conventional explanation, which is why it stayed unidentified. They floated ideas like the experimental lander or even a complex hoax, but no evidence supported those. The physical traces were undeniable. The failure to explain Socorro conventionally highlights the limits of the debunking approach when faced with hard evidence.
It really seems like the official explanations consistently failed to account for the core features of the strongest cases: the intelligent movement, the multi-sensor data, the credible witnesses.
Exactly. And this persistent mismatch, this inability of the standard explanations to cover the best evidence, is what fundamentally changed Dr. Hynek.
He spent years applying these official explanations. What did that experience do to his perspective?
It forced him to confront the data directly. He couldn't ignore the sheer number of high-quality reports that simply didn't fit the neat boxes of stars, balloons, or weather. He started seeing a pattern.
The residue.
That's the term he used. An irreducible residue of truly anomalous cases. And critically, this residue wasn't just blurry photos from unreliable witnesses. It was often data from the most credible sources: pilots, military personnel, police officers, sometimes backed by radar or physical evidence.
So this pushed him from being the Air Force's skeptic for hire
to becoming a public advocate for taking the phenomenon seriously. He realized the official investigation wasn't equipped, or perhaps willing, to genuinely study the most puzzling cases. His shift was quite profound.
And this led him to develop his own classification system.
Yes, the system that gave us terms everyone knows now, like close encounters. He wanted a way to categorize sightings based on the nature of the observation and the evidence involved.
Close encounters of the first kind were just sightings.
Right. Distant lights, daylight disks, things seen but without direct interaction or physical effects. Close encounters of the third kind were the most controversial sightings involving alleged occupants or beings.
But scientifically, he focused on the second kind.
CEIs were key for him. Sightings that left behind physical evidence. Burn marks on the ground like Socorro, depressions from landing gear, verified electromagnetic interference with cars or radios, radar confirmation.
Why were CEI so important?
Because, as Hynek put it, they bring the UFO into the laboratory. You're not just relying on witness testimony. You have tangible data, soil samples, radiation readings, radar tapes that can be analyzed using standard scientific methods. That's where real progress could be made.
After Blue Book ended, Hynek became quite critical of the project, didn't he?
Very critical. He openly criticized the leadership, like Major Quintanilla, for what he saw as ignoring evidence that contradicted the debunking agenda. He felt the investigation was often superficial.
He also mentioned the Air Force's hesitation to commit to explanations sometimes.
Yes, like with widespread power outages that coincided with UFO sightings. He suggested they were sometimes reluctant to quickly blame a conventional cause, perhaps fearing later analysis might prove them wrong and cause embarrassment. Better to say nothing or delay.
It sounds like even within the system, there were attempts to do better science. That O'Brien Committee in 1966.
That's right. It was an internal review committee that actually recommended strengthening the UFO program. They suggested contracting with universities to seriously investigate maybe 100 good sightings a year, dedicating significant resources like 10 man-days per case.
That would have been a completely different approach.
Fundamentally different. Proper field investigation, in-depth analysis. But that recommendation was ignored. It never happened.
Why not?
Likely due to cost, internal resistance, and perhaps the feeling that it would signal too much official seriousness about a topic they wanted to downplay. Its failure almost certainly paved the way for the Condon Report, which took a much more skeptical approach.
So the institutional desire to minimize one out over the recommendation for more rigorous science.
It appears so. The stage was set for Blue Book's termination, based on a conclusion that many, including Hynek, felt didn't fully grapple with the best available evidence.
We've dug into the cases, the explanations, the internal conflicts. Now let's turn to the endgame. The official conclusion of Project Blue Book, how they justified shutting it down, and the questions that just refused to go away.
Project Blue Book officially closed its doors on December 17, 1969. The primary justification given was the outcome of the Condon Report.
That was the big scientific study conducted by the University of Colorado, right? Supposedly an independent look at the phenomena.
That was the idea, led by physicist Dr. Edward U. Condon. Its formal title was the Scientific Study of Unidentified Flying Objects.
And its conclusion was essentially negative.
Overwhelmingly so. The report concluded that further extensive study of UFOs couldn't be justified on the grounds of scientific advancement. It found no convincing evidence for extraterrestrial visitors or advanced technology.
So, based on Condon and reviews by the National Academy of Sciences, the Air Force issued its final verdict.
Correct. A three-point conclusion that became the official stance for decades. 1. No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security.
Okay. Point 2.
2. There was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge.
And the big one, number 3.
3. There was no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles. Basically, case closed. Nothing to see here.
And I leaned on the statistics, right? Out of those 12,618 cases.
The officially classified 701 is unidentified. That's about 5.6%. On the surface, that might seem like a small, perhaps negligible percentage.
But critics like Hynek had issues with how those numbers were presented and even calculated over the years.
Big issues. They pointed out instances where the Air Force seemed to, let's say, massage the statistics for public consumption. For example, an earlier report claimed only 3% were unknowns.
When the real number at that time was much higher.
Significantly higher, closer to 22%, according to some analyses of the same dataset. Shifting from over 20% unexplained down to 3 or even 5.6% unexplained changes the narrative dramatically. It turns a significant anomaly into a minor nuisance.
And what happened when those 701 unidentifieds were looked at more closely later on?
Well, Hynek Center for UFO Studies, CUFOS, did a reevaluation of about 640 of them. The findings were interesting. While many were simple light phenomena or disks seen in daylight,
What stood out?
the quality. The unresolved cases weren't just the vague reports. They disproportionately included the reports from the most credible observers, military pilots, police, air traffic controllers, and often involved multi-sensor data like radar or physical traces. The cases hardest to explain were often the best documented.
Which brings us back to the criticism of Blue Book's methodology itself. Hynek didn't mince words later, did he?
No, he became quite scathing. He accused the personnel, particularly in the later years, of incompetence and doing shoddy, superficial investigations. That's when he coined the phrase, the Society for the Explanation of the Uninvestigated.
Implying they weren't really investigating, just explaining away.
That was his charge. But the conclusions were often predetermined and the actual work was minimal, especially on complex cases.
And what about those persistent claims of hidden data? Sightings over sensitive military sites being kept out of Blue Book. You mentioned Hynek saw a few top-secret files.
Right. His observation could suggest one of two things. Either there wasn't much highly classified material related to UFOs, or the truly sensitive stuff, the reports indicating potential threats or extraordinary capabilities seen over nuclear bases, for example, were handled by entirely different intelligence channels, bypassing Blue Book altogether.
So Blue Book might have only seen the cases deemed safe for public relations purposes.
That's a plausible interpretation, favored by many critics. The most sensitive data might have gone elsewhere. We see echoes of this institutional reluctance to engage seriously in other places too.
Like that UK Ministry of Defense memo from the 90s.
Exactly. That 1995 internal memo is quite revealing. It shows the UK's defense intelligence staff felt pressured to admit publicly they were interested in UFOs, but they were terrified of the embarrassment.
Why?
Because the truth, as the memo stated, was that a lack of funds and higher priorities had prevented any study of the thousands of reports received. Admitting they had tons of reports but hadn't properly studied them would make them look incompetent or negligent. Someone even scribbled "ouch" on the memo.
So better to say nothing or dismiss it than admit you don't know or haven't looked properly.
That seems to be the institutional logic, driven by fear of embarrassment and perhaps a desire not to open a Pandora's box they couldn't control. That institutional inertia is a huge part of Blue Book's legacy.
So the project officially ended, dismissed the phenomenon, but the data didn't go away.
Not at all. The residue Hynek talked about those well-documented cases involving intelligent maneuvers, physical effects, radar visual confirmation. They continue to challenge the official conclusion.
And Blue Book's legacy is therefore quite mixed.
Extremely. On one hand, it successfully shut down official, public-facing Air Force investigation for decades. On the other hand, Hynek's involvement and later advocacy, fueled by his Blue Book experience, essentially launched the modern civilian UFO research movement. His classification system is still used.
So we began looking at Blue Book in its Cold War context. We examined some truly extraordinary cases like Lakenheath and Socorro. We saw the institutional pressure to debunk, and we followed Hynek's journey towards recognizing that persistent, unexplained residue.
That's the arc. And although Project Blue Book concluded that UFO research held no scientific value, the sheer volume and quality of those high strangeness reports, often from highly credible people, leaves us with that fundamental question Hynek kept asking. Why is it so hard for established institutions, scientific or military, to confront phenomena that don't fit the accepted framework? When the data points towards something genuinely anomalous, something potentially deeply uncomfortable, why is the default response so often dismissal rather than deeper investigation? That's it for this journey beyond the known. If the unknown calls to you, do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow.
There is so much more waiting to be discovered. And if you really want to help us out, consider becoming a member. With Secret Passage, you will unlock early access to our episodes, our audiobook library, Audiobook Underground, and a rotating list of curated wonders, other videos we recommend for curious minds. For those who want it all, Vault Access gives you everything, plus a board seat where you can request topics for us to explore in future episodes. Your support keeps the adventure alive.